Welcome to the Biz Coach Show, hosted by my Biz Coaches and presented by the TLG Group. Our show is focused on giving entrepreneurs the edge they need to succeed. Your hosts today are David Macon, that's me, and Eric Whitmore. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, always fantastic to be with you. And before we jump into today's topic, we do invite you to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you already subscribed, don't forget to click the bell notification to get alerted of episodes as they release. And today we are actually continuing a conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the importance of knowing your business. So if you've not already listened to episode 20, you may want to go back, check that out, and then come back to this one as we jump into some new topics. So just to recap, previously we talked about the importance of knowing your market, your industry, your product, your service, your USP, and your key metrics. So today we're going to explore a few more topics, starting with your team. So Eric, I know you've obviously worked in a number of different organizations. You've coached a number of different organizations, worked with people of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds. And I know you know how important it is to really understand your team, their strengths. So maybe tell us a little bit about that and kind of why you think that's so critical for the small business owner.
Well, as you're even saying that, it's making me think, we've had some pretty sizable teams over the years. As a matter of fact, my last team was multi-hundreds of people. But my core group was my director group. And at that point, I had 9 sales directors and then an operational director. But I think that the biggest thing to really kind of take away from this, and that core group would probably be more representative of what our typical client would probably have as a direct report team. One of the biggest challenges is really truly understanding and knowing your team. And that's a big piece of an effective leader. I mean, it comes down to how good your leadership is and really truly understanding your team, knowing their strengths, knowing their weaknesses, and how to lead them effectively. So, I think of some of my clients and I'm like, okay, well, this particular individual is really good at these particular skill sets. And this individual is more tech savvy and they really enjoy kind of digging into some of that component of the business. And this particular individual would just be happy just to, be on a phone and just crank through a bunch of phone calls. And ironically, that's a skill set that completely, I'm like, I would have no interest in whatsoever, but they're totally fine with it. So I think it's really important as an owner to really understand who it is that you have working on your team. David, as you know, one of the tools that we used to use was StrengthsFinder.
Oh yeah.
StrengthsFinder, sorry. And I'm trying to remember the name of that book, but the StrengthsFinder's tool that we used would walk an individual through and help them quickly acknowledge where their strengths are. And as a leader, being able to kind of review that information and glean some insight into, where their strengths are, where they're most comfortable doing the skills that they do or doing the tasks that they do, I should say. And then recognizing where there's opportunities where that it's something they're not necessarily inherently good at, or more specifically don't want to do. It allows you to kind of balance out the team and find put people in roles that they want to be doing, one, that they're good at, two, which typically we like doing stuff we're good at. But then in addition to that, three, as you look at your team and you recognize there's gaps in certain areas, things that you want to be better at as an organization, you can recognize that, hey, I don't have anybody in my team who's really good at this. So let me plug somebody, let me hire somebody. The next person I hire, whatever role we're looking to fill, let's make sure that they have some experience and more particularly that some inclination to want to do these types of tasks, because we need somebody who's really good at that. Somebody who's naturally very organized, it works really well in a support role, like an assistant role, but they can also do a lot of project management type work. And that could be very valuable for an organization, especially if you're taking on new projects, growing and scaling your operations and things like that. So I think it starts one with learning and knowing your team, and then understanding, where they're best suited to fit into the organization and what roles they can play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say that, Eric. One of the things that I've done for a while, and I think we both kind of started doing around the same time, is when I take over a team or if I add somebody new to my team, we do the Strengths Finder assessment. And I think what's interesting is a lot of people, if they've never done that before, that's a new concept to them. They're kind of surprised not only by how accurate it is, but they actually learn things about themselves and like, oh my gosh, yeah, that makes sense why I've been doing this, for 15 years, right? So it could be
Right.
for them, but then it also helps the team. In fact, that's one of the exercises we do is everybody brings their assessment and we take turns kind of reading each other's strengths and things that how to leverage that or things that might frustrate them based on that strength. So that helps everybody understand one another better as well. But then I think the other team, and I know you've done this, I've seen you do this, and you're a master at it, is really connecting with your team, right? So not just understanding them, their skills, their strength, really, taking time to invest in them. And I think that's even more important, if organizations are doing a hybrid work model or work from home, you have to be so much more intentional about connecting with your team. So maybe just any thoughts on that, on how you've kind of leveraged that connection or taken the time to connect with people and how that's influenced your leadership.
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. And sometimes I probably take that. I probably don't recognize that in myself as much. But that's a valid point. I would say that the biggest opportunity there is you have to care about people, right? I think that one of the opportunities that any organization goes through is determining what makes a good leadership or a good candidate for a leadership role. And if you remember very succinctly in early days, very distinctly in the early days, I would argue that the people we were promoting were really good salespeople, which didn't necessarily always make for good store managers.
Right.
And store managers, as good as they were, didn't always necessarily make the best sales directors. And it was in their emotional intelligence, which we don't talk enough about, in my opinion, in the work world and business in general. I know it's more prevalent today than it was maybe 10 years ago, but it's the ability to acknowledge somebody on a personal level and really kind of gain insight into them as an individual and truly know and understand how what you say impacts people. That level of emotional intelligence goes a long way. And I think that as you're saying what you're saying, David, I'm kind of thinking through for myself, that was something that always I think gave me an edge over my competition from a leadership role is I took the time to understand, to your point, my people, and more specifically, what connections I had with the people that I led. So for instance, if we had a connection in sports, right? And we both were really into football or some other, area where we could make a connection, I would go above and beyond to use that, to leverage that relationship. And I don't mean that leverage in a bad way. I mean, we're just really allowing ourselves to connect in that way. And you could probably speak better to this than I could, but in every employee that I'd engage with, I'd look for that relatability, right? And so I would ask questions until I found 2 or 3 things that I could relate to them on. So in every scenario, right, I'm going through and you remember how big my territory was and how many employees I have. I would go into a store and I'd walk in and I'd get to meet some people. And sometimes I'd have some preconceived notions and biases going into a store because I'm frustrated with performance or something like that. Yeah. But I would recognize that if I took the time to ask enough quality questions and understand what was important to my employees, it would quickly allow me to connect with them and identify with them what was important to them, and then draw back our goals, our ambitions, our intents to how it relates to what's important to them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's as you're mentioning that, I think that's one of those competitive advantages that I had is I took the time to understand my people, what was important to them, and then I could take the goals and intentions of the business and where, as an organization, we were trying to grow, and drive those things back to the individual and say, hey, this is going to be great for you because as we adopt this or we improve this category of business or increase sales in this area or whatever, those results will impact you in this way, and it'll allow you to do these things because these are things you're super passionate about.
Yeah.
So,
right.
It takes a lot, I think, quite honestly, to really kind of, as you think even through logically what I just shared, all the different pieces that go into that. And it's not something you do in one interaction. But I will say that the better you get at it, the more you're able to kind of do this quicker and assess these opportunities quicker and recognize. And then what you'll also find is that, some people are, their connection may be in sports. Other people, their connection may be in music. It could be, whatever, but, and I'm a pretty diverse individual. I got a lot of different passions, and they're not, they're relatively unique in the sense that I could go a lot of different ways. I could talk about country music, I could talk about rap music, and it makes me relatable in a lot of different ways. That's not superficial. That's legitimately passions that I have. But those then allow me to extend those relationships to another level and go deeper. And then that also allows me to uncover things about the individual, about their past, about why they think the way they think, about why they do what they do, and help them uncover from a personal development perspective how we can improve their skill sets, and then ultimately allow them to grow and scale within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there absolutely was an ulterior motive in understanding my people better, but that's how we got better results. And I helped people grow and improve their opportunities for their career by taking that extra time to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, because I think sometimes people might look at that and say it's disingenuous, whatever, and it's really not, right? You can do both. You can leverage what you're learning to help drive performance and actually care about the person. I think I want to say it was Jocko. I saw a reel or something, and he was talking about manipulation is when you use people to achieve your own ends, but leadership is when you use what you know about that person and leverage it to help them be better and better, improve the mission and accomplish the mission. And I think that's the difference, right? If you're just using people, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, getting to know that person to help them be the best they can be, because that helps you, it helps the team, and it helps them in their journey and, your company and beyond. So I think, great point there.
Yeah. The last thing I'd add to that is I was extremely passionate about helping my people understand at the end of the day, our organization, which I was very passionate about, as you know, and we both were, and believed wholeheartedly in what we were doing as an organization. Even when we had missteps, I still knew that we had the best intentions for our people and where we were going with the organization. But I say that because I think there's many times where in that business, being a retail operation, it was an entry-level role in many cases, and many people would come in and turn over and go out. And I mean, you remember the early days, we had 150% turnover or somewhere thereabouts, 140 some percent.
The dark ages.
Yeah, exactly. We were able to drive that down, below 50%, which was phenomenal. It's a 3x, return in reducing your turnover. But that was because we made conscious decisions on how to engage our people, how to determine who's the best candidate to be in a leadership role. As you and I both know, people don't necessarily leave organizations, they leave leadership.
Yep.
And so when leadership is weak, more specifically, when they're not leaders and they're just managers telling people what to do, or to your point, trying to manipulate or coerce them to do things through different poor tactics, that's going to drive people out. They'll only tolerate it for as long as it takes to find some other opportunity.
Right.
And so if you're not altruistic, and I say that tongue in cheek, but if you don't really intend to help improve your people, they're not going to hang around. They're not going to stay. And this is why I'm concerned for many small business owners, because they don't have these skill sets or haven't developed these skill sets. And this causes and creates a challenge for them, because they have a hard time retaining good quality people. And it's because they're not creating an opportunity for them to grow with the organization. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which actually ironically goes into a whole nother category of opportunity, which is what many business owners don't do, and why they struggle to be able to sell their business later on, is they don't scale the organization in a way that they allow people to grow and develop within the company.
Yeah.
Right. So their individual skill sets, and allow them to take that to the next level.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and actually, there's some great data by both Gallup and McKinsey around kind of Gen Z in the workplace, and a lot of times people focus on millennials, but really it's all Gen Z right now, and that's where people are struggling. And the data suggests, right, apart from compensation, right, which I think everybody can relate to, one of the key things they're looking for is the connection with the manager, and specifically is the manager concerned about their well-being. So it used to
Right.
be kind of more growth and feedback, and while those things are important, it's, do they genuinely care about my well-being? And that's one of the most important considerations of our current workforce. And if you're not spending that intentional time connecting, they're going to go find somebody who does care. And so
That's right.
I think, just to make it practical, the starting point I talk with business owners, managers, is just a scheduled one-on-one, whether that's weekly, every other week, based on your workplace, and part-time, full-time, all those kinds of things. But people will complain, I don't have time to do that. And my argument is, you don't have the time not to do it, right? Because
That's right.
if you're saying your person, your direct report, isn't worth 15-30 minutes a week of dedicated one-on-one time, your priorities are not where they should be. And so
Right.
that's really the starting point. Is you'll find other opportunities kind of throughout the day, throughout the week, but have a scheduled one-on-one 30 minutes every week with that person. You may not need all 30, maybe you need 45, but that's the starting point. And they feel that value of, okay, it's important, it's scheduled, and they come to expect it, and that goes a long way. So just a practical tip to start bringing this to life.
Yeah. If I could, I'm going to share one brief point. And you remember very well, I know you do, when I made this specific change in my leadership style, and it goes back to my personal development evolution, I guess I'll call it, when I first met Jack Canfield and kind of adopted him as my mentor. When I began my path to become a certified coach in the success principles that Jack teaches, it was a significant impact in my personality, as a person. I stopped focusing on the goals and started focusing on the development of the people that helped me achieve those goals. And it was a significant transition. Initially, it created some rift within the organization, because it was like, I would openly tell people today that it took us 6 to 9 months to really roll that out and introduce that. But you remember my manager meetings for my territories, my regions, yes, we talked about sales development, and we talked about categorical sales focus and how we're growing our individual store businesses and things like that. But there was as much, if not more, information and coaching on personal development, setting goals, time management, all those categorical things that were really super important in regards to getting the tasks done on a day-in-and-day out basis, but how it was more relevant to you as an individual. And I challenge people, quite honestly. I think that's a huge takeaway today in business, is that if you'd invest as much time in making your people successful on a personal level, that would carry over into your business tenfold.
Yeah.
And we had the statistics to prove the success we had on a sales front, right? In an organization that was prominently focused on sales, we were able to demonstrate that we were outperforming our peers in many cases on a significant level. And I was when I spent the least amount of time focused on driving sales results.
Yeah.
Because we were focused on developing people and better leaders, more specifically. And the more that we did that, the more that kind of evolved and grew and fostered that kind of attitude and focus. And consequently, we got far better results from it.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I think, to borrow from, let's say, it's built to last, but you were building a clock, right? And that takes more time, but both in the midterm and the long term, that's the strategy that wins, is the people development strategy. Everything else, you may see some immediate results, just because people are scared or threatened or feel like they're going to get fired, right? But when you're investing in people, that's the strategy that wins, and then builds a better culture where you're developing future leaders, and the cycle just repeats. So I got to see that firsthand. Absolutely. And it works, right? It works, and then it's sustainable, and then everybody's job is better because of it. So it's a great point. Awesome. Well, I know we could probably spend 3 hours on this because we're both passionate about it.
Easy.
But let's maybe shift gears to another important thing, right? If we take the time, know our team, connect. Really, the next thing is understanding our customer, and really that's critical. Whether you're in product-based business, service-based business, or anything in between. So, Eric, maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of the importance of understanding your customer, your client, and what that does for the small business.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I mean, I don't think it's really conceptually, it's not a whole lot different. You're taking the time to understand your people, you understand your client, right? If you don't understand your client, you're selling them products and services that may not be relevant to them or may not be as important to them.
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, one of the challenges that we often run into in running our own business is that we think that all our great ideas are phenomenal and everybody's going to love them.
Yeah.
and unfortunately, many of us will have an experience, at least one, if not many, where we realize that that's as much as it was a great idea in our head, it didn't seem to resonate with anybody else, or at least not enough in a way to really be able to grow and scale that particular individual business.
Yeah.
So the best way to do that is really kind of take the time to understand what are the pain points of the people, your target audience, right? What are they struggling with? What are their frustrations? And I'll be honest, I've been, investing more and more time trying to understand this as I move into the business coaching over the last 4 years. The more that I do this, the more that I realize I know. Let me state this clearly. I know what I think is wrong in a business, and I'm usually relatively good about. I'm intuitive and I understand what's wrong with the business. However, what I see as wrong in the business isn't necessarily what the specific pain point that the business owner is struggling with.
Yeah.
So I see the root cause, right? I'm able to decipher down and get to the root cause. But what the business owner feels the pain on, or where they're struggling, is different. And there's a disconnect there. And so it really requires to ask more good questions to truly uncover, okay, this is your pain point. This is your frustration. For instance, as I've mentioned many times on this show, that many clients come to us because they're lacking leads or sales.
Yeah.
Right. And more specifically, leads, probably even more so than sales. And I would often say, look, I know you think that you have a lead problem. I'm going to guess that you more likely have a conversion problem, a sales problem.
Yeah.
Right. And I've said that many, many times. Right. And the reality is that I have to continue to ask questions until I really uncover what truly is the issue. Because until we do that, and that's where, as an owner, as that business owner, we're helping them distinguish what's their pain point versus what's their customer's pain point.
Yeah.
So in that case, the business owner is my customer, but what that business owner needs to be doing is asking, what are the pain points that my clients are struggling with? Are they happy with our fulfillment process? Are they satisfied with our delivery solutions? What are those pain points that our clients are having? And when we ask those questions, we get better answers, and more specifically, we get better understanding of where we need to improve our business. Is our customer service at the level it needs to be at, right? And that's hard. Because one, you have to ask people to stop doing what they're doing long enough to answer a question for you to help you identify where the problems in your business are, right? And we try and do that through surveys, and we try and do that through phone calls and things like that. But there's a huge opportunity there, and the more that you take the time to know and understand your client, and there's many different ways that you can do that. But I think that the important part is to make sure you have a concerted effort on how to do that. And reviews can be a great way to uncover some of that information.
Yeah.
If you're getting Yelp and Google reviews and things like that, and you actually read the context of what's been shared, regardless of the score. I mean, yes, we always want 5-star reviews and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, if you read into the context of the review, and you get deep into it, and you literally look to, okay, what was the overlying challenge here with this experience? Then you can uncover where the gaps are, and maybe how your delivery is. One instance is not really relevant, but if you have 10 instances of a similar concern or frustration, a pain point for a client, that's something you need to start digging into, because there's an obvious miss there. It could be an individual within the organization, or it could be a process, but you need to uncover what the gap is. And the only way that you're going to get that is really getting to know your clients better and ask good questions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, certainly the sales process makes sense. I was as you were talking, Eric, I was thinking about the marketing process, and I'm sure you're similar in the fact that between email, LinkedIn, phone calls, I probably get 10 to 15 solicitations a day for different products and services and software. And it's funny because, if you look at most of them, I have zero interest in, aren't appealing to me at all. No offense if you've reached out to me on LinkedIn with a solicitation, but when I look at the ones that grab me, right? If I compare the two, it's the ones more often than not, what I get is, hey, so and so, hey David, here's this product that we offer, and here's all the stuff that it does. Book a demo, and I'm like, that doesn't appeal to me. What gets my attention is, hey, don't you hate it when this happens? And then boom, we have a solution for that. Let's see how we can implement that for your business, right? That gets my attention. It's when you're speaking directly to that pain point. And if your marketing is, all of the stuff that you can do and all the things you can offer your clients, you're probably missing the mark. You need to lead with that pain point. But if you don't understand the pain point well enough, and sometimes I'll talk to people that, they've never used a product or worked in a similar business that I'm in to understand my pain point. And so we're starting off on the wrong foot, and we're not aligned. And so it's like, if you're new to this, or you hire somebody on your team that's never been in that industry, really help them understand like what the challenges are, what the pain points are. And that's going to help them in marketing. That's going to help them in sales, and all those other things. And sorry, just one other point that you sparked for me is, there's the acquisition pain point. So, what their pain was before they became a customer or client of yours. And then there's understanding, to your point, the pain points as a customer, right? So where's their friction within your business, within your process, and how do you solve that? So sometimes we focus on the acquisition pain and not the current pain they have as a customer of ours.
Yeah, it's a great point, and good distinction between the two, right? To your point. Yeah. As you're mentioning all your frustrations with those bombardment of sales efforts, or I guess, or whatever, but as you're even mentioning that, I'm thinking through then my series of engagements with different people. But to your point, we call that niching down in marketing, right? Niche down to your client and know very specifically. And you can have different target audiences, but for every different target audience, you need a different messaging strategy to target that individual, right? And when I first was educated on the customer avatar, I was like, oh, it's so much work. I mean, it's so you get into the minutia of, oh, this is a single mom who's a nurse and has 2 kids, and I'm like, how does that help my marketing? I couldn't really grasp it initially. Yeah. But when you say, hey, don't you hate when you put in a 12-hour shift and you're coming home and you need to feed the kids, and you haven't even considered what it's, and then it's going to be some other fast food solution, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't you rather have had prepared, a slow cooker roast beef, potatoes and vegetables, and when you come home, it'll be ready to serve. And what a great way. And it's like, that's straight out of an infomercial. I mean, that's, and well,
it's funny. Go ahead. But, I was to say, it's funny you say that, because that's what went through my mind is that's the exact format infomercials do, right? It's these slightly exaggerated clips of people struggling with everyday tasks, but that's what it is. It's 10 or 15. Don't you hate it when this happens? And oh no, your chicken stuck to the pan, not again, right? And then it goes to the solution, and that's what we should be doing too. So it's funny you say that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that often that gets lost. To your point, the reality is I'm so convinced that I have the next great idea, and you may very well have it.
Yeah.
But if you're not speaking to the right client in the words and the messaging that resonates with them, that makes them say, oh, I have to have this, it's going to land flat, right. And it's when you try to market to everybody is when you miss the mark, and you struggle with finding the right messaging for your clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll admit, I still, trying to figure out exactly who my niche is as a business coach. I know I can help everybody. But from a marketing perspective, the way that it's going to make the most impact is for finding the key pain points of the individuals and what specifically they're looking for my acquisition process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I don't want to tip my hand too much, but as you know, I'm kind of going through a bit of a pivot and a rebrand because of that feedback. That the pain point that I've been trying to market to isn't as resounding as a different pain point. So I'm kind of shifting to say, well, this is what I keep hearing from clients and customers. So I guess I'm going to focus on that, kind of rebrand around that. So it's and I think that's important for people to know that might be listening to this is, your pain point may change, or you may have started with one vision of what your solution offering was going to be, but you have to adapt to that market and you have to adapt to the feedback from your customers.
Yep. Great point.
So, but more to come on that. That's a future episode.
Absolutely. We're excited. We're waiting for it.
Yeah. Thanks. But okay. So we touched on the sales process. Anything else there? We're talking about the importance of knowing your business and really understanding, the funnel, the sales process that your business has. We touched on a little bit from a customer kind of pain point perspective, but anything else you want to add on the importance of understanding the sales process, regardless of, where you fit in as the business owner?
Yeah. It's in the Business Mastery Conference that we did a couple of weeks ago. I think it was over a month ago now. Wow. How time flies. But there was a piece that I did on sales. Obviously I did a piece on sales, and that's, a little bit of my forte. But one of the things that I reminded people of during that presentation was the idea, at the end of the day, if you're a solopreneur or a small operator, generally speaking, as the owner, if you're not the best salesperson in the organization, if you've grown to a point where you have one or two other people who are better at sales, but you need to be the most competent in the sales process, because somebody at the end of the day has to manage the people who sell. And if you're the only salesperson and you're not actively reviewing a sales process, something that you're following, a documented step-by-step approach on how to handle every customer, then you have no basis to go back and be able to determine whether or not what you're doing is successful. I mean, you got to track your sales data, right? If you had 35 sales conversations last month, and that turned into 15 assessments, and of those 15 assessments, you closed 5 clients. Well, you have 33% closing ratio, and you're what I say, 15 out of 30, whatever those numbers are, right? You back into those numbers. If you're not tracking that, one, you have no idea whether or not you're progressing or regressing in your activity, and that's leading to your sales. But if you don't have a step-by-step process, you're not going to know that whether or not 5 out of 15 is a good closing ratio. Yeah. Right. Or more specifically, if you did 5 out of 15 last month, but this month you did 2 out of 22 for an 11% closing ratio, that's a concern, because you just went from 33 to 11%. What was the difference? Right. And you won't know what the difference was if you don't have a step-by-step process that allows you to determine, okay, where were the gaps here? So for instance, the first one is in my needs analysis and determining, or building rapport is my first step. Right. So I need to build rapport. Well, did I shortcut the building rapport step? Or do I truly have a good connection with this individual? Okay, no, I did that right. Okay, well, then I go to step 2. Did I do a thorough needs analysis? Did I uncover the concerns that they have? Going back to the pain points, did I uncover the pain points that they're struggling with that would help improve that, right? And I continue to progress through that. And when I asked for the close, did I actually ask for the business? Or did I just assume that they were going to do it? And I just kind of, did I actually say the words? So David, what would it take to move forward with us today? Right. Yep. Right. If I didn't ask that question, I didn't close the sale. I didn't go for the close. Right. And so there's this progressive step-by-step 6 steps that you go through. And then the last one's the post-sale follow-up. Right. There's been a number of my sales in the coaching business world that I have not sold in the initial conversation, even in the follow-up conversation, but 2 or 3 weeks later in some e-drip follow-up campaign, they've reached back out and said, you know what, I think I'm ready. I want to go ahead and move forward. Yeah. And, one of them was, we didn't actually close it because of our show, but somebody went back and reviewed. They had already made the mental decision to buy, but they went back and they were reviewing some of our earlier episodes of my Biz Coach Show, or the Biz Coach Show. And when they did, they were like, oh no, this is the guy I got to work with. And so, that closed the deal. But and for me, I see that as a portion of post-sale follow-up. So again, by looking at all those steps and uncovering where was this person, when did they determine that this is the right relationship, that I was the right solution for them? If I don't have that process for myself, then I'm not going to know whether or not I'm progressing or regressing in my conversion process, and whether or not I'm closing deals. And then as the leader, that was the other thing I want to make sure I say, as the owner of the business, you need to be the best salesperson of your service, especially in the beginning. And if you're not the best salesperson of your service, if you haven't been able to sell your own service, then how could anybody else ever sell you better than you can sell yourself?
Right. Yeah.
And that was one of the messages I really drove home, is like, hey, look, in the beginning, when you're first starting out, you need to be the best salesperson. And you need to know the sales process better than anybody, because if you don't know that sales process, the sales process for your particular business better than anybody else, how is anybody going to get better results?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now, ultimately, at some point, you can introduce somebody else to own that, and who's even more better and disciplined and more experienced in that process, and improve that, and then become your sales manager, or whatever that looks like. But in the beginning, it's got to be the owner, because otherwise, how would you challenge people when the results aren't there?
Right.
Right. And I actually learned that the hard way too.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think what's resonating with me about what you're saying is, and it's important for business owners to understand this, is a sales process is just like any other business process. It needs to be documented. It needs to be structured. There needs to be, checks and balances and inspection points, and just like you would have for manufacturing or anything else. Right. So that's the first thing. And when it's a process, the reason that's so critical is that if it's a measurable process, you're less reliant on somebody who has a lot of talent in that area. And you may have a different number, Eric, but for me, out of 500 salespeople, there's maybe 1 in 500 that's just a phenomenal, natural born salesperson that you think of. The rest are just people that come in with varied backgrounds. They understand the process, they put in the work, they self-reflect, they get coaching, and they learn how to do it. And so if you're banking on finding that 1 in 500, amazing, over the top, like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing, you're going to struggle, right? Especially in our current labor market, versus build a really good process and teach people how to follow the process and give feedback on the process and measure the process. Your results are going to be that much better. So that was the first thing. And I think just the second thing that comes to mind for me is, for me, I tend to work with kind of more like tech centric companies. And so in a lot of cases, the owner is maybe the person who created the product. They're more of the IT, product development side of the business. And maybe sales is not an area that they focus on. They hired that out, to your point, right? They hired a salesperson to run it so they could focus on the IT. But even in that situation, they need to understand the sales process for their business, right? Even if they're not the one who's directly doing it, they should be able to have a conversation and understand that process inside and out. Not only, just succession planning, if that person leaves, somebody's got to manage that, but it's their business, it's their revenue. You have to understand those things and inspect it. So just, everybody needs to be a salesperson in that business. And to your point, nobody more so than the owner.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a major takeaway, though, for a lot of startup, particularly. The reality is, at the end of the day, the owner has to be the best salesperson. Or if it's a group of owners, if it's multiple people, one of those people needs to be the best salesperson and needs to own that sales process. Like I said, at some point, somewhere down the road, eventually you became the owner of the sales process within the organization that we used to be at. But that was years into our development and our growth as an organization. Right. And it was out of necessity because we needed multiple people to carry that torch. But in the beginning, the first core group of people is, it was our COO. And then ultimately it became people like myself as the executive director team to kind of extend that. And then that, and then we introduced the training team in, I don't know, about the 4th or 5th year. I can't remember exactly, probably about the 3rd or 4th year. You were the first trainer that we hired. Right. It was the first person of that department. And then it was, okay, now you are the carrier of that torch and you need to sustain it. And you had a team working for you, but it was an extension of each time. It was, and carried that message. And we tweaked the sales process a little bit over time, but generally speaking, it was pretty consistent. The same process that we started with early on.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and bringing it full circle, it's a process, right? So,
yep.
Speaking of process, kind of two other things we want to focus on. One is, understanding the fulfillment process. So sales, obviously, the front end, fulfillment, kind of the back end of that customer life cycle. So what are your thoughts on the importance of that business owner really understanding the nuts and bolts of the fulfillment process?
Yeah, so interesting. Every business is different. I liken the majority of my time spent in the wireless industry and what that fulfillment process looked like, right? It was like I hand you the box, the phone, right, with the accessories and
yeah, pretty simple,
you're on
right?
your way. Yeah, and you're on your way, and all I need to do is make sure I follow up with you. And quite honestly, in the early days of that relationship, the follow up was really designed around generating referrals, right? So I could get more sales.
Right.
But yes, there was some, how do I set up my voicemail? I mean, you go through some of the different components of that, and then we created automated processes, or at least the carrier did. It created processes to provide that kind of solution for clients. But that's, as you grow and scale, those are the things you need to look for. Is how can I streamline this process to provide a better experience for my clients? In the information world that I live in today, it's quite a bit different. Even then, there's the interaction fulfillment that I do, meaning delivering the coaching solutions and things like that in an organized fashion. So scheduling that on my calendar. I mean, there's so many things that go into the deliverables of a coaching relationship, right? Yeah. There's also all the back end content that I have available for my clients where they can go in and find that information, and making sure that they understand and remember how to get back into, because they don't use that video content as relevant or as what's the word I want to say, as often. And consequently, so they forget how to log in and find that information. So there's a lot that goes into that. And again, I think you have to have a very conscious thought process about how do I want my client to experience the level, not just the deliverable of the initial interaction, right? The initial transaction, I guess, for lack of a better term, but what does it look like in the months or weeks and months after that? How do I continue to provide the solutions that I offered up front and do it in a way that's of value to my client? If I recognize that my average client is lacking in time, how do I make it more efficient for them to find the information that I said I was going to provide for them? Right. And if I take that into any other product business, it's like, okay, well, this is the product that I sold you today. Making sure it got delivered to you in a timely manner, all that fun stuff. But then, do you understand how to use this product? Right. Is there something, can I provide videos with training tutorials to make sure that you have the best user experience? Did you know that your product can also do this? That was one of the things that I learned in the wireless industry over all those years with the tech advances that happened. I joke with people and say, hey, I started in the wireless industry when it was paging. And I get this funny looks, if they're younger, they're like, what's a pager? And then if they're older, they're like, oh yeah, I remember those, it turns into this story. But the, how much the industry changed in that 20 plus years that I was doing that. The reality is that the fulfillment process, like I'd sell you the phone. Well, shoot, you have no idea what all your phone is capable of doing if you just recently purchased a phone and 2 years earlier you were carrying a flip phone.
Right. Yeah.
If you were carrying a flip phone and 2 years later you upgraded to some, I don't know, BlackBerry or one of the new Samsungs or something like that, and you're like, I can get on the internet and I can watch movies and I can do this, and you're like, what? This is like game changer. Yeah. But how do I ensure that all the things that are available to you? And then that created a whole new world of upsell opportunities, because I took the time to help educate you on how you can use your phone. The camera was another big thing.
Yeah.
The evolvement of the cameras in this phones that we had. It was like, did you know that you can actually make a movie on your phone now? It was like that kind of conversation. So I'm kind of getting off track a little bit, but the point is that if you don't take the time to educate your client after the sale and all the different things that your products or services are capable of doing for the client, then the initial purchase is over, but the life cycle of the client dips off dramatically if you don't find a way to continue to engage them and show them the value you actually continue to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the things that business owners, at least that I work with, and your experience may be different, is as you grow, the risk of messing up the fulfillment increases, right? So,
Oh, yeah.
so the bigger you get, the more people you have involved in that process with varying degrees of, competency and things like that, the harder it is to really nail that smooth onboarding and fulfillment process. And so for me, right, that's really where technology, whether it's a CRM or a project management tool, that can be really critical. But I also think, we have to understand we're in the environment of now, right? With Amazon, where you can get, hit buy and it shows up in 3 hours. I mean, it's just insane.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy, right?
Yeah. So it's like, if you're not embracing that now, or, just in time fulfillment type solution, you're going to struggle, because that's what the current, buyer is looking for, regardless of the kind of business that you're in. So just a couple of cautions there.
Yeah. And we had our at least one, if not two episodes dedicated to, AI, and more specifically, digitizing and automating your business, right? And that, which is what at my Biz Coach is one of the things we talk about on a regular basis.
Yeah.
That is one of those pieces, is that post fulfillment, right? I mean, even the fulfillment process, how much of that can we automate and digitize? And then after fulfillment, how can we ensure that we continue to be of value to the client, right? Because that keeps the client, like I said before, it keeps the client life cycle longer, extends the life cycle. The longer the life cycle of the client, the more likelihood they come back and buy other products and services from you.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Right. As soon if you sell it, if it's a one and done and you move on, the likelihood of getting additional sales or even referrals or reviews or any of that kind of stuff drops off dramatically.
Yeah.
Right. If you walk into my coffee shop today and buy a coffee, that's great. Right. But at the end of the day, if I make you have a phenomenal experience while you're in the coffee shop, and I take the time to do a digital email that says, hey, your text message, sorry, thanks for stopping by and getting your coffee today. Here's $1 off your coffee the next time you stop in.
Yeah.
I've just extended the life cycle of that client by 30 days easy.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And do that every time, and I could have a client for life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
but
critical when you're building the brand, the reputation, the business, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Sure, you don't want to forget about it when you're big, but when you're small, it's so critical.
Absolutely critical. And I think, quite honestly, with the way that the business environment and landscape of business is evolving today, I think it's equally critical, quite honestly, after the fact, as you grow, because now you get to the point where you're so big that you take clients for granted. Yeah. And they begin questioning whether or not they want that relationship with you anymore.
Right.
I mean, not to pick on any particular large brands, but as a business coach, my target audience are small businesses.
Yeah.
So I have made a conscious decision to not meet with clients in the big, over-established coffee shops, and instead we go to locally owned coffee shops.
Yeah.
And support those clients, because those are my clients, right? So
yeah.
Even if it's not an actual client, it's representative of who my clients are.
Yeah. Well said. Awesome. Well, we've got two more real quick. I think the other one, sales process, fulfillment process, because they're so critical to growth and revenue and everything else. I think just the last one, kind of a catch-all, but all of your core business processes, right? As the owner, especially if your company's maybe a little bit larger than startup size, and you've got a lot of people and maybe even different departments or specializations with all these different processes, critical that you understand those core processes, not every little detail, but overall, what are the things that keep your business running, identify them, and document those processes. So I think that's what we're talking about here. Your thoughts on that, Eric?
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier about the documentation of those processes. That's probably one of what I recognize as one of the biggest gaps for small business owners. And this goes, as you know, I've become more and more passionate about the challenges of small business owners actually having the ability to be able to sell their business at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And this is one of the major detractors of that. One is they didn't set up a succession plan, and then another one is strategic financial planning. But then the third one is they don't have documented processes and systems, because now this is not a transferable asset. This is David running David's business with a couple of people doing things that David tells them to do. And because they don't have a documented system or process to follow for themselves, it's haphazard. Sometimes it gets done, sometimes it doesn't get done. We forget to do it from time to time. We try to remember to do it. Those are things that without that documented process, these are the types of things that slip off. And become. I'm trying to think of the best term that I can use, but it literally it's second thoughts, right? So a process for ordering, replenishing inventory. That's an important process. It should be documented. We talked about sales process. We talked about customer service follow-up, right? All of these things should be, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, right? And that should be in some type of electronic manual, right? In the old days, we'd put them in a 3-ring binder. Nowadays, we put it, in our internal website or something, but it's documented somewhere so everybody knows exactly what they should be doing. And in many cases, much of that can be handled through some electronic process of some sort, meaning that some of these things are even done with automations through, an email follow-up process or something to that effect.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously this is something that I am passionate about, because it's one of the things that our business specializes in, right? Is documenting and training and all those things. But I think I'm going to give an example from the reverse perspective. So actually, somebody that I was mentoring, they survived 3 rounds of layoffs for one reason. Okay, and that reason was that they were the only person who knew how to generate a report. And because of that skill set, that person was, able to survive in this very difficult and challenging business, because they had unique knowledge that other people in senior leadership within that business did not have. And because of it, they became such an asset that they were almost indispensable, which was great for that person, right? Especially in the mentoring relationship and helping them through that. But if you think about that from a business perspective, if you have an employee, right, or maybe multiple employees that have unique knowledge that you don't have as the business owner, that puts you at risk, right? Because if those are, not great employees, or they're underperforming employees, or, maybe a toxic person that's having a negative impact on your team, you have to be able to make those decisions to move those people out. And oftentimes what I find is people think that they're too small to worry about succession planning. And I would say you're never too small to think about and worry about that, because you could be held hostage by people that have those skills. So I just kind of want to touch base on that. I think just important for small business owners to understand that and to really think about that, because you never want to be held hostage to something you don't know with your own business. So, well, I think the next big thing that we want to look at then is understanding your competition. So we've talked about your team, your customer, the sales process, fulfillment, all of your core business processes. But I think you could still have a struggling business if you don't understand your competition. So Eric, would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think back to the early days of the wireless industry specifically. I could make analogies to some of the smaller businesses I had over the years, whether it was the trucking business, the leads business, the coffee shop. That was actually a good example of knowing your competition. But I think about the early days of wireless, and I remember when I first started my first stores that I was in, one of the biggest challenges that we would have is somebody would come out with a new promotional offer. And obviously back then it was all print and radio, maybe an occasional cable commercial or something, but most of it was print and radio. And you'd see your competition would come out with an offer of, buy a pager and get 6 months of airtime or whatever, or get a cell phone and get a pager for 3 months of airtime, or, there was all these different offers. And what you'd have to do is you'd have to sift through and read the, I would call it legalese today. It wasn't really necessarily legalese, but what were the the things that played into that, like, oh, you had to have a 2-year contract to do this, or you had to also buy $100 worth of accessories to get this special offer, or whatever it was, right? You needed to make sure that you understood everything that went into that. And so we had to literally pick up the phone whenever we'd have somebody say, like they would call in, they would ask and say, oh, hey, what's the price of such and such a phone, or what's the price of this offer for paging, or whatever it might be. And then they would be like, well, your competition's doing this, or maybe you'd get a copy of a particular flyer, not a flyer typically, but a magazine article or something like that. And then as a team, as the store managers, we'd share amongst ourselves and say, hey, did you see this? Take a look at this or whatever. But we literally would have to pick up the phone and then call a competition and find out from them what were the stipulations for that particular offer.
Yeah. Yep.
And the reason that was so important is I needed to be able to sell against the competition.
Right.
So when you as a client would walk into my store and say, yeah, I was looking at this and I was over at, let's say, Verizon, for instance, which was AirTouch back then. But they would come in and say, I was over at such and such a company and they had this offer and this was their price point. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that required a 2-year contract and it came with these particular services and you had to get this additional. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, well, and I can match that offer with my service and do this way, right? But I couldn't overcome those objections because they were really good about crafting these deals. Oh, yeah. So as I think back to that was one of the things that was super important. Is to be able to outsell or sell against your competition, you need to know what they're doing and what their strengths are and what their opportunities are, so you can convey that to your potential client. And if I jump ahead quite a few years at that point to my coffee business, one of the mistakes that we made in acquiring the coffee business, it was an existing coffee shop that we bought, and I tell this story to illustrate the importance of really taking the time to understand your competition. What had happened was we had a business that we were fairly confident was making good profits, and we were excited to be able to buy it at a price that we thought was very affordable. It was maybe 2x of their EBITDA. And we're like, oh, this is going to be good. We're going to build this up. There's so much opportunity here. It's in a great area. The area is being redeveloped. We thought we could just grow right along with it. And in all the due diligence on the financials and everything like that, I was confident that I had uncovered anything that I thought was a concern, and we addressed it in the sale. And then fast forward 6 months into acquiring the business, numbers are beginning to drop. Well, initially it's summertime, so it's going to be slow. That makes sense, right? But it didn't really come back in the fall. We couldn't figure out why. We're like, what's wrong? Well, we need to do this. We need to do that. We need to improve this. We need to improve that. Well, one of the metrics that I was measuring very closely was the revenue per transaction. Well, that had almost doubled. We went from $4.50 to like over $7. Nice. And so, it was like, we're making a huge improvement here, but overall revenue is not improving, which means we have less customers. And so we, tracking it back and what's going on. Well, what we didn't uncover in our due diligence of the acquisition is we did not recognize that there were 5 new coffee shops that had opened within a 5-mile radius of our coffee shops.
Brutal, man.
And they had all opened within a year of us acquiring the business.
Yeah.
So, leading, like in the time leading up to or shortly up after our time of acquiring. So what we were feeling was the business just kind of bleeding off to other areas, right? Well, this is the hot new coffee shop, so business would just kind of trend to go over here. And that happens in any business environment, right? Whenever there's something new, there's a tendency to kind of everybody gravitates that. But what crushed us was not knowing that there had been 5 new coffee shops opened. So even though the revenues looked good, those companies were ramping up while this company was static. And so even though we felt like we could capture more new business, what we didn't realize is with the 5 new ones fighting for that same amount of business immediately was spreading out all the potential clients. And it was a huge hit. And we were able to sustain for 2.5 years, but when it came time to renew the lease, we ended up just shutting down the coffee shop, because with all the work that we did to incrementally add more clients and bring in more revenue, it was still, we're fighting for a small portion of the market share.
Yeah.
And it was just not having the due diligence in the due diligence process to recognize that other shops had opened in the area. And you literally don't know how else you would have known that other than to canvass the area.
Yeah.
So again, knowing your competition, if people are moving in, and the dagger in the side was the sixth one that literally opened across the street from our coffee shop.
That'll do it.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a coffee shop; it was a coffee shop during the day and a craft beer facility at night. And I'm like, oh, we can't compete with that.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a brewer.
Yeah. No, those are all really good points. I was going to share maybe a complementary point, but kind of on the other end of the spectrum too, is I think sometimes business owners are too hyper-focused on competition. I don't know if you've seen that as well. But, but then they become reactive, right? All I'm doing is reacting to my competitors instead of leading in my market. And so I think that's something to think about too is, yes, it's important to know what they're doing. Yes, it's important to understand their moves. But really, as the business owner, you have to detach and look at the broader landscape of, where's the industry headed, or where is nobody, solving pain points for all of these clients that all these competitors serve, and I'm going to go that direction. And I think a good example of that, based on our mutual experience, was when John Ledger came and took over T-Mobile. That's what he did. He said, what's broken across the industry? Like, forget the individual competitors. What sucks? What does everybody hate? And I'm just going to focus on that. And nobody else was doing that because everybody else was, kind of playing the same old game, just different ways and trying to outmaneuver. And he just went a very different direction, and that disrupted the competitors, and they gained huge market share in that process. And so I think, if you're only looking at those moves and trying to compete versus, thinking a little bit more strategically, a couple moves ahead, or maybe in a different way, that can help you set your business apart too.
Yeah, and ironically, as you mentioned, that is a huge takeaway, because I think, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that is going to be the game changer in all service-based businesses in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
and I don't typically like to make very overarching statements like that, but I am 100% certain that people are going to come in. They're going to do, to your point, what Ledger did in the wireless industry, because that didn't just upset and that completely changed the entire wireless industry.
Yeah,
and
telecom overall, right? I mean, not even just wireless.
Yeah, exactly. And it dramatically changed, the landscape, because for the longest time before Ledger, T-Mobile was like, there's these three carriers, and then there's T-Mobile, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot that was done to help improve the situation over time. But when he came to the table and started mixing it up that way, and the marketing strategy that they leveraged, and I think that what his approach really kind of changed everything. And it's funny, because now I'm thinking about Ryan Reynolds and the deal with Mint Mobile.
Yeah.
Ryan Reynolds went out there and said, okay, what are the pain points with I wouldn't really call it prepaid wireless, because it was a standard offering, right? And they were able to basically tie that together and make that an offer that, this is, it's like, let's do this. And they literally grew this business, and what they get, 1.3 billion.
It was huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And out of I don't think that they had more than 10 million subscribers. So, look what they were able to accomplish in just a short period of time, a handful of years, not even that long.
Yeah.
But just focused on the pain points that people had in that particular industry, in that particular category of client for that business, right? And they were able to really kind of own that with some aggressive marketing, and it changed everything. And I think, like I said, that's what's going to, and with technology, you can do that more cost effectively than ever before.
Right.
You can do it more targeted with digital marketing better than ever before. And people that are willing to go in and disrupt an industry are going to make huge changes in the industries. I won't necessarily improvements, although I think they are improving. But they are definitely changing, and in the process, capturing major market share.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think that's a big piece to add to that, is it's that disruptive approach to looking at your competition, where are the true pain points, literally going back to our original conversation earlier, right? About recognizing what's your, for your client. But leveraging that, what's your competition not doing well?
Yeah.
And then be better than your competition at that. To your point, being the leader in that category, game changer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, great points. I want to find out what's new and happening at My Biz Coaches here in a second. Before we do, though, just a couple wrap up kind of action items for our listeners or viewers out there. First and foremost, we covered a lot of good stuff today. Use the list of items that we've covered, and it'll be in the show notes to refine your understanding of your business, right? Just absolutely critical. Dedicate time to deep dive into any gaps in your understanding. Be intentional about connecting with your team. Schedule time with key personnel at all levels to document your core processes and really take the time to understand your competition. So with that, Eric, as we wrap up, anything new or noteworthy happening over at My Biz Coaches?
I wouldn't say there's anything new or noteworthy. We do have we're excited about our event coming up in October. We're still finalizing details on that, but the one thing that I would say is that we're always looking for good quality partners. And, I have some interesting conversations recently with some new potential partners. I'm excited to maybe here in the next 30 to 60 days be able to announce that. But, one of the pain points that my clients have is marketing. Yep. And at My Biz Coaches, one of our challenges is finding good quality marketing partners that we can introduce to our clients, that we know that they're and at different price points, right? My clients, our clients, I should say, range from 250,000 to 4 or 5 million in revenue. And the what makes sense for a marketing strategy at 250,000 doesn't make sense at $5 million and vice versa, right? Yeah. And so we're working on a strategic partnership that will allow us to really kind of serve our clients where they are and where they need help to help them grow their business. So awesome. We'll see how that develops over the coming weeks and months, but I'm pretty excited about that opportunity.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we'll have to stay tuned. If you guys want to learn more about that, head over to mybizcoaches.com. Follow Eric and My Biz Coaches on social media. Same for TLG Group, trainleadgrow.com, and also on social media, Train Lead Grow. And appreciate you watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And Eric, always great to hang out with you. Thanks for some great insights today.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Appreciate it all as always.
You bet.